Margaret's plan. The autumn leaves crunched beneath Margaret's orthopedic shoes as she watched the black sedan pull away from her driveway. Through the lace curtains of her front window, she observed her daughter Jennifer's perfectly manicured hand wave dismissively from the passenger seat, while Todd's thick fingers drummed impatiently against the steering wheel. They were already late for their weekend getaway to the Hamptons, another one of their essential trips that seemed to multiply like weeds in a neglected garden. "Grandma," 8-year-old Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're gone." Margaret turned from the window, her weathered hands smoothing down her floral house dress. At 73, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who would learn to make every step count. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes, the same shade as Lily's, held a sharpness that belied her age. "Yes, dear, it's just you and me for the weekend. What shall we do first? Bake cookies? Read stories?" Lily fidgeted with the hem of her purple sweater, her small face creased with worry lines that seemed far too mature for someone who still lost teeth. She glanced toward the front door, as if expecting her parents to return, then stepped closer to her grandmother. "Grandma," she whispered, tugging on her dress, "I need to tell you something important." Margaret knelt down, her knees protesting with a soft crack. She cupped Lily's face in her hands, feeling the soft warmth of youth beneath her fingertips. "What is it, sweetheart?" "They think I can't hear them, but I listen sometimes, when they're in Daddy's office, talking on the phone." "Oh," Margaret kept her voice gentle, though something cold began to settle in her chest. "They want to take your inheritance, Grandma. Daddy said you're getting incompetent. He said that means you can't think right anymore, and then they can have your house and your money." Margaret's world tilted. For a moment, the familiar walls of her living room, decorated with 40 years of family photographs and handmade doilies, seemed to shimmer and blur. She had built this life brick by brick, dollar by dollar. This house had sheltered 3 generations. The garden outside had grown from her own hands, and the savings account she'd carefully tended had blossomed through decades of careful frugality. "Are you sure that's what they said, Lily?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "Daddy was talking to someone on the phone. He said you leave lights on and forget things, and that you fell last month. He said that proves you can't take care of yourself anymore." Margaret's mind raced. The lights. She had been leaving the porch light on for the stray cat that visited. The fall had been a stumble on her front steps during an ice storm. Nothing more than a bruised shin that had healed within days. But Todd had been there, had insisted on helping her inside, making a grand show of concern. Did Mommy say anything? Lily's eyes filled with tears. She said it would be easier if you just moved to that place, the old people place. She said then they could fix up the house and sell it for lots of money. Sunny Gardens Assisted Living. Margaret had seen their brochure on Jennifer's passenger seat during their last visit. She'd assumed it was research for a friend's elderly parent. Now the truth settled over her like a shroud. "Grandma, I don't want you to go away." Lily threw her arms around Margaret's neck. "And I don't want them to take your house. This is where you belong." Margaret held her granddaughter close, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. Over Lily's shoulder, she caught sight of her late husband's photograph on the mantelpiece. Harold smiled at her behind glass, wearing his Navy uniform, forever young and proud. He had saved for 30 years to buy this house, had painted every room with his own hands. "What would you do, Harold?" she asked him silently. "How do I fight my own daughter?" But she already knew the answer. Harold was a strategist, a man who believed that the best defense was a carefully planned offense. He would gather intelligence, he would prepare, he would protect what mattered most. "Lily," Margaret said, gently pulling back to look into her granddaughter's eyes, "can you keep a secret?" "Yes, Grandma." "A big secret? One that's just between you and me?" "Yes, Grandma." Lily nodded with the solemnity of a young person suddenly thrust into an adult world. Good. Margaret stood, her resolve crystallizing like sugar in the bottom of a teacup. Over the next 3 days, while Jennifer and Todd enjoyed their weekend retreat, Margaret began her campaign with the methodical precision of a general preparing for war. She started with reconnaissance. On Monday morning, she called her doctor's office from the kitchen phone, her fingers steady as she dialed. "Good morning, Dr. Peterson's office. This is Nancy." "Hello, Nancy. This is Margaret Whitmore. I was wondering if anyone had requested copies of my medical records recently." A pause. "Well, Mrs. Whitmore, I'd need to check with Dr. Peterson about—" "Nancy, dear, you've known me for 15 years. Has my son-in-law, Todd Brennan, called asking about my health?" Another pause. Longer this time. I probably shouldn't say anything, but yes, last week. He said he was concerned about your mental state and wanted to know if you'd been showing signs of dementia. Margaret's grip tightened on the receiver. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. HIPAA laws, you know. But, Mrs. Whitmore, if you're having memory issues, you should come in for a consultation. I'm sharp as a tack, Nancy, but thank you for being honest with me." Margaret hung up and immediately called her bank. "First National, this is Rebecca speaking. Rebecca, this is Margaret Whitmore. Account number 4478921. I need to know if anyone has inquired about my accounts recently. Let me check. Oh, yes, Mrs. Whitmore. Someone claiming to be your son-in-law called last Thursday. He wanted information about your account balances and mentioned he had power of attorney. We told him we'd need to see documentation, of course. Thank you, Rebecca. And there is no power of attorney on file, correct?" "Correct, ma'am. Your accounts are still solely in your name." Margaret's next call was to James Morrison, the lawyer who had handled Harold's estate. His secretary put her through immediately. "Margaret, how lovely to hear from you. How can I help?" "James, I need to ask you something confidentially. If someone wanted to have me declared incompetent, what would the process look like?" A long silence. "Margaret, is everything all right? Just answer the question, please." "Well, typically, a family member would petition the court claiming you were unable to make sound decisions about your finances or care. They'd need medical evidence, witness testimony, that sort of thing. There'd be a hearing, and a judge would make the determination. Why do you ask?" "Hypothetically, if I wanted to protect my assets from such a challenge, what would you recommend? Are you talking about your daughter?" Margaret closed her eyes. James had known Jennifer since she was a child, had watched her grow from a sweet little girl into what she had become. "Yes, Margaret, you should come in. Today, if possible. This is serious. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. She hung up and found Lily in the living room, coloring in a Disney princess book. The little girl looked up with eyes that held too much knowledge for her age. "Are you going to stop them, Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart, I am. But first, would you like to help me with a special project?" Lily's face brightened. "What kind of project?" Margaret smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "A treasure hunt."
Well, typically, a family member would petition the court, claiming you were unable to make sound decisions about your finances or care. They'd need medical evidence, witness testimony, that sort of thing. There would be a hearing, and a judge would make the determination. Why do you ask? Hypothetically, if I wanted to protect my assets from such a challenge, what would you recommend? Are you talking about your daughter? Margaret closed her eyes. James had known Jennifer since she was a child, had watched her grow from a sweet little girl into what she had become. Yes, Margaret, you should come in, today if possible. This is serious. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. She hung up and found Lily in the living room, coloring in a Disney princess book. The little girl looked up with eyes that held too much knowledge for her age. "Are you going to stop them, Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart, I am. But first, would you like to help me with a special project?" Lily's face brightened. "What kind of project?" Margaret smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "A treasure hunt." James Morrison's law office occupied the second floor of a Victorian house on Main Street, its walls lined with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and important decisions. Margaret sat across from his mahogany desk, her purse clutched in her lap like armor. "Margaret, I've known you for 25 years, James said, removing his reading glasses and setting them carefully on his desk. "You're one of the sharpest people I know. The fact that Jennifer and Todd would attempt this, well, it's unconscionable. What are my options?" "Several. First, we can set up a trust immediately, transferring your assets into it with you as the trustee. That way, even if they somehow succeeded in having you declared incompetent, the trust would protect your property. Second, we can document your competency with a thorough evaluation by a psychiatrist I know, someone who specializes in elder law cases. Third," he paused, "we can gather evidence of their attempted fraud." Margaret leaned forward. "Tell me about the third option. If we can prove they're deliberately fabricating evidence or manipulating the system for financial gain, we can not only defend against their petition, but potentially pursue charges against them. Do you have any evidence of their plans, their conversations with my doctor and bank, and—" Margaret hesitated. "My granddaughter overheard them discussing it." James nodded slowly. "Children's testimony can be complicated, but it's not impossible. The question is, how far are you willing to go?" Margaret thought of Harold's photograph, of the house he'd painted room by room, of the garden where she'd buried 3 beloved dogs and countless memories. She thought of Lily's frightened face and innocent trust. "As far as it takes. All right, here's what we're going to do." For the next hour, James outlined a strategy that was both simple and elegant. They would set up an irrevocable trust with Lily as the beneficiary to take effect when she turned 35. Margaret would retain use of the house and income from the trust during her lifetime. They would document her mental competency with Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in capacity evaluations. And most importantly, they would gather evidence. "I'll need you to record any conversations where they discuss their plans," James explained. "Connecticut is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you're a part of. If they're as bold as you suggest, they'll likely discuss their strategy in front of you, assuming you can't understand or remember." Margaret felt a chill of understanding. They wanted her to play the part of the confused old woman. Perhaps she could use that to her advantage. "James, what if I pretended to be more confused than I am?" "Margaret, hear me out. If they think their plan is working, they might get careless. They might say things they wouldn't otherwise say." James studied her for a long moment. "It's risky, and it would be difficult for you. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. Your Harold used to say you were the strongest person he'd ever met." At the mention of her late husband, Margaret's resolve hardened to steel. "Then let's give them exactly what they're expecting." That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with Lily, a collection of photographs and documents spread before them. She had decided to turn necessity into adventure, transforming the protection of her most important papers into a game. "Now, Lily, this is very important," Margaret said, holding up a manila envelope. "These are special papers. My marriage certificate, Harold's Navy records, the deed to the house. We need to keep them safe." Lily nodded seriously. "Where should we hide them?" Margaret smiled. "That's where you come in. You're going to help me create the best hiding places ever, places that only we will know about." They started in the basement, where Harold's old workbench stood covered with a sheet.
Behind it, Margaret had discovered a loose brick in the foundation wall during their first year in the house. Harold had made it into a secret compartment, joking that it was where they'd hide their treasure if pirates ever invaded Connecticut. "Can you fit your hand in there, sweetheart?" Lily giggled as she worked her small fingers into the space. "It's like a secret cave." "Perfect. This envelope goes there. Can you remember where this is?" "Behind Grandpa Harold's workbench, in the wall with the loose brick." "Excellent. Now, let's find more places." They spent the next hour creating a network of hiding spots throughout the house. Birth certificates went into a waterproof bag tucked inside the old piano bench. Insurance policies were sealed in plastic and hidden in the false bottom of Harold's tackle box in the garage. Margaret's savings bonds were wrapped in oilcloth and placed in a coffee can, then buried in the garden beneath the rose bush Harold had planted for their 30th anniversary. "This is like being a spy," Lily whispered as they patted dirt back over the coffee can. "In a way, it is," Margaret agreed. "Sometimes grown-ups don't behave the way they should, and we have to be very clever to protect the things we love." As they worked, Margaret felt a strange mixture of sadness and empowerment. She was preparing for war with her own child, but she was also sharing an adventure with her grandmother that would bond them forever. Years from now, when Lily inherited this house and these memories, she would understand why her grandmother had been so careful to protect both. Their final hiding spot was the most important, a small, fireproof safe that Margaret had James's secretary deliver that afternoon. It contained copies of all the hidden documents, plus Margaret's new will and the trust papers. The safe went into the old cedar chest in the master bedroom, beneath quilts that had been in the family for 3 generations. "Only you and I know where everything is," Margaret said as they sat on her bed, surveying their completed work. "If anything happens to me, you tell Mr. Morrison, the lawyer. He'll help you find everything." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Grandma." Margaret pulled Lily close, inhaling the scent of childhood innocence mixed with the faint smell of garden dirt from their adventures. "I'm going to be here for a long, long time, sweetheart. But it's always good to be prepared." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, Margaret sat in Harold's old recliner and looked through photo albums. Pictures of Jennifer as a baby, a toddler, a young woman on her wedding day. Where had it gone wrong? When had her daughter's heart grown so cold that she could plot against her own mother? Margaret's phone rang, startling her from her memories. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice came through the speaker, artificially bright. "How's everything going?" "Oh, fine, dear. Lily and I are having a lovely time." "That's wonderful. Is she behaving herself?" "Of course, she's a delight. I must admit, I've been feeling a bit scattered lately." Silence on the other end. Then, "Scattered how?" James Morrison's law office occupied the second floor of a Victorian house on Main Street, its walls lined with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and important decisions. Margaret sat across from his mahogany desk, her purse clutched in her lap like armor. "Margaret, I've known you for 25 years, James said, removing his reading glasses and setting them carefully on his desk. "You're one of the sharpest people I know. The fact that Jennifer and Todd would attempt this, well, it's unconscionable. What are my options? Several. First, we can set up a trust immediately, transferring your assets into it with you as the trustee. That way, even if they somehow succeeded in having you declared incompetent, the trust would protect your property. Second, we can document your competency with a thorough evaluation by a psychiatrist I know, someone who specializes in elder law cases. Third," he paused, "we can gather evidence of their attempted fraud." Margaret leaned forward. "Tell me about the third option." "If we can prove they're deliberately fabricating evidence or manipulating the system for financial gain, we can not only defend against their petition, but potentially pursue charges against them. Do you have any evidence of their plans?" "Their conversations with my doctor and bank, and..." Margaret hesitated. My granddaughter overheard them discussing it. James nodded slowly. Children's testimony can be complicated, but it's not impossible. The question is, how far are you willing to go? Margaret thought of Harold's photograph, of the house he'd painted room by room, of the garden where she'd buried 3 beloved dogs and countless memories. She thought of Lily's frightened face and innocent trust. As far as it takes. All right, here's what we're going to do. For the next hour, James outlined a strategy that was both simple and elegant. They would set up an irrevocable trust with Lily as the beneficiary to take effect when she turned 35. Margaret would retain use of the house and income from the trust during her lifetime. They would document her competency with Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in elder law cases. And most importantly, they would gather evidence. I'll need you to record any conversations where they discuss their plans. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you're part of. If they're as bold as you suggest, they'll likely discuss their strategy in front of you, assuming you can't understand or remember. Margaret felt a chill of understanding. They wanted her to play the part of the confused old woman. Perhaps she could use that to her advantage. James, what if I pretended to be more confused than I am? Margaret, hear me out. If they think their plan is working, they might get careless. They might say things they wouldn't otherwise say. James studied her for a long moment. It's risky, and it would be difficult for you. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. Your Harold used to say you were the strongest person he'd ever met. At the mention of her late husband, Margaret's resolve hardened to steel. Then let's give them exactly what they're expecting. That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with Lily, a collection of photographs and documents spread before them. She had decided to turn necessity into adventure, transforming the protection of her most important papers into a game. Now, Lily, this is very important, Margaret said, holding up a manila envelope. These are special papers. My marriage certificate, Harold's Navy records, the deed to a house. We need to keep them safe. Lily nodded seriously. Where should we hide them? Margaret smiled. That's where you come in. You're going to help me create the best hiding places ever, places that only we will know about. They started in the basement where Harold's old workbench stood covered with a sheet. Behind it, Margaret had discovered a loose brick in the foundation wall during their first year in the house. Harold had made it into a secret compartment, joking that it was where they'd hide their treasure if pirates ever invaded Connecticut. Can you fit your hand in there, sweetheart? Lily giggled as she worked her small fingers into the space. It's like a secret cave. Perfect. This envelope goes there. Can you remember where this is? Behind Grandpa Harold's workbench, in the wall with the loose brick. Excellent. Now let's find more places. They spent the next hour creating a network of hiding spots throughout the house. Birth certificates went into a waterproof bag tucked inside the old piano bench. Insurance policies were sealed in plastic and hidden in the false bottom of Harold's tackle box in the garage. Margaret's savings bonds were wrapped in oilcloth and placed in a coffee can, then buried in the garden beneath the rose bush Harold had planted for their 30th anniversary. This is like being a spy, Lily whispered as they potted dirt back over the coffee can. In a way, it is, Margaret agreed. Sometimes grown-ups don't behave the way they should, and we have to be very clever to protect the things we love. As they worked, Margaret felt a strange mixture of sadness and empowerment. She was preparing for war with her own child, but she was also sharing an adventure with her granddaughter that would bond them forever. Years from now, when Lily inherited this house and these memories, she would understand why her grandmother had been so careful to protect both. Their final hiding spot was the most important. A small, fireproof safe that Margaret had James's secretary deliver that afternoon. It contained copies of all the hidden documents, plus Margaret's new will and the trust papers. The safe went into the old cedar chest in the master bedroom, beneath quilts that had been in the family for 3 generations. "Only you and I know where everything is," Margaret said as they sat on her bed, surveying their completed work. "If anything happens to me, you tell Mr. Morrison, the lawyer. He'll help you find everything." "Nothing is going to happen to you, Grandma." Margaret pulled Lily close, inhaling the scent of childhood innocence mixed with the faint smell of garden dirt from their adventures. "I'm going to be here for a long, long time, sweetheart, but it's always good to be prepared." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, Margaret sat in Harold's old recliner and looked through photo albums. Pictures of Jennifer as a baby, a toddler, a young woman on her wedding day. Where had it gone wrong? When had her daughter's heart grown so cold that she could plot against her own mother? Margaret's phone rang, startling her from her memories. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice came through the speaker, artificially bright. "How's everything going?" "Oh, fine, dear. Lily and I are having a lovely time." "That's wonderful. Is she behaving herself?" "Of course, she's a delight. Although, I must admit I've been feeling a bit scattered lately." "Scattered? How?" "Oh, you know, forgetting where I put things. I spent an hour this morning looking for my reading glasses. They were on my head the whole time." "Mom, that's concerning. Maybe we should talk about getting you some help around the house." There it is, Margaret thought. The false concern, the leading suggestion. "Help? I've been managing this house for 40 years. "I know, Mom, but you're not getting any younger. And with your episodes, maybe it would be good to have someone check on you regularly." "Episodes?"
The fall last month, forgetting things. Todd mentioned he's worried about you. Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. Todd, who had barely spoken 10 words to her in the past year, was suddenly concerned about her welfare. "I'm fine, dear. Just a bit tired." "Of course you are. Listen, Mom, Todd and I have been discussing some options. There are some wonderful facilities? Assisted living communities. Very nice places where you'd have company and medical care if you need it. We could sell the house and..." "Sell the house?" Margaret let her voice rise with genuine alarm. "Jennifer, this is my home. Your father and I built our life here." "Mom, you can't live in the past forever. Dad's been gone for 5 years. You need to think about your future, about being practical." Practical. The word landed like a slap. Harold's military pension, Margaret's social security, and their careful savings had left her quite comfortable. The house was paid off, her needs were modest, and she had enough money to live independently for decades. The only practical consideration was Jennifer and Todd's desire to get their hands on her assets. "I need to go, dear. Lily needs me." "Of course, we'll talk more when we get back on Sunday. Love you." The line went dead before Margaret could respond. She set the phone down with trembling hands, not from age or infirmity, but from rage. Her own daughter was already mentally dividing up her possessions, planning her exile to some sterile institution. Margaret looked again at Harold's photograph. In the dim light of the living room, his smile seemed sad, knowing. "Don't worry," she whispered to the image. "I won't let them win." The next morning brought Dr. Sarah Chen to Margaret's front door precisely at 10 o'clock. She was younger than Margaret had expected, perhaps 45, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of professional competence. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Chen. Mr. Morrison arranged for me to conduct a competency evaluation. Please, come in. Would you like some coffee?" As Margaret prepared coffee in her spotless kitchen, Dr. Chen observed everything. The organized spice rack, the neat calendar on the refrigerator, the morning newspaper folded beside a crossword puzzle that was half completed in Margaret's precise handwriting. "Mr. Morrison explained the situation," Dr. Chen said gently.
I want you to know that this evaluation is meant to protect you, not to judge you.
I understand. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen put Margaret through a comprehensive battery of tests. She asked about current events, had Margaret perform mathematical calculations, tested her memory with word lists and story recall. She observed Margaret's speech patterns, her physical coordination, her ability to reason through hypothetical scenarios. Mrs. Whitmore, I have to ask, have you been experiencing any confusion or memory problems? Margaret considered her words carefully. Doctor, I'm 73 years old. Sometimes I walk into a room and forget why I came in there. Sometimes I put my car keys down and have to look for them. But I balance my own checkbook, manage my medications, drive safely, and take care of my granddaughter. If that's incompetent, then half the population should be institutionalized. Dr. Chen smiled. Can you tell me about your daily routine? Margaret described her life: the morning walk around the neighborhood, breakfast while reading the newspaper, household maintenance, gardening, her twice-weekly volunteer work at the library, her book club meetings, her bridge games with friends. You mentioned volunteer work. How long have you been doing that? 15 years. I help with the children's reading program and organize the annual book sale. And bridge? Every Thursday for the past decade. I'm usually the one who keeps score. The other ladies say I'm better at arithmetic than they are. Dr. Chen made notes throughout their conversation. When she finished, she packed up her materials and looked at Margaret seriously. Mrs. Whitmore, based on this evaluation, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning skills are sharp, and your ability to manage your daily life is clearly intact. In my professional opinion, you are fully competent to make your own decisions about your finances and living situation. Margaret felt a rush of relief so strong it left her momentarily lightheaded. You'll put that in writing? Absolutely. I'll have a detailed report to Mr. Morrison by tomorrow morning. After Dr. Chen left, Margaret sat in her kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. She was officially, medically competent. Now came the harder part. Jennifer and Todd returned Sunday evening in their usual flurry of complaints and demands. The traffic had been terrible, the hotel had messed up their reservation, the restaurant had overcooked Todd's steak. Margaret listened with the patience of someone who had raised children and knew that some people never outgrew the need to blame others for every minor inconvenience. How did everything go with Mom? Jennifer asked Todd quietly, though not quietly enough to escape Margaret's deliberately sharpened hearing. Fine. She seemed a bit more scattered than usual, lost her glasses twice, forgot she'd started the dishwasher. Margaret had in fact performed these little charades for Todd's benefit, playing up small moments of confusion while Lily watched with wide, knowing eyes. Good. Not good, but you know what I mean. They thought she couldn't hear them from the kitchen, but Margaret had learned that people often forgot how sound carried in older houses. She continued washing dishes while they discussed her decline in the next room. I called her during the week. She seemed confused then too, and she got upset when I mentioned assisted living. Of course she did, but she'll come around when she realizes she can't manage on her own anymore. How long do you think it will take? Not long. My buddy Steve went through this with his mother-in-law last year. Once the doctor signs off on the incompetency, it moves pretty fast. Margaret's hands stilled on the dinner plate she'd been washing. Once the doctor signs off. They already had a doctor in mind, someone willing to declare her incompetent without a proper evaluation. What about Mom's lawyer? What about him? He's probably older than she is. Besides, once we have medical evidence, the court won't have much choice. And Lily? What about her? She's 8 years old. It's not like she can object. Margaret felt something cold and final settle in her chest. They had discussed this thoroughly, planned every detail. They weren't acting out of love or concern. This was a business transaction to them, with her as the commodity to be disposed of. She finished the dishes in silence, then joined them in the living room where Todd was helping Lily with her homework. Grandma, Daddy's helping me with my math. How wonderful! Margaret settled into her chair and picked up her knitting, a project she'd been working on for months.
Todd, you're so good with numbers." Todd looked up, pleased with the compliment. "Well, I do work in finance." "Oh yes, at the investment firm. You must see all kinds of situations with people and their money." "I do. It's amazing how often families wait too long to deal with aging parents. The smart ones plan ahead, make the tough decisions before it's too late." "How sad," Margaret murmured, "to lose your independence like that." "It is sad, but it's also reality. The important thing is having family who care enough to take action." Margaret looked up from her knitting to meet Todd's gaze. In his eyes, she saw calculation, not compassion. He was already spending her money, already planning what to do with her house. "You're right, of course. Family is so important." That night, after Jennifer and Todd had gone home and Lily was asleep, Margaret sat in her bedroom with a small digital recorder James Morrison had given her. The device was no bigger than a matchbox, designed to capture conversations with crystal clarity. Tomorrow, the real performance would begin. Margaret's opportunity came sooner than expected. On Tuesday afternoon, while she was tending her garden, she heard Todd's voice coming from the side yard where he was talking on his cell phone. She crept closer, the recorder in her pocket. "I'm telling you, she's definitely declining. Yesterday she asked me the same question 3 times. No, I don't think we need to wait much longer. Well, Jennifer's having trouble with it, but she'll come around when she sees the medical evaluation." Margaret pressed the record button and moved closer, pretending to examine her rose bushes. "Dr. Kellerman said he can do an evaluation next week. He's flexible about these things." "No, she won't know what's happening until it's too late. The key is getting her declared incompetent before she tries to change her will or anything stupid like that." Margaret's hand tightened on the recorder. Dr. Kellerman. She'd heard that name before. A quick-fix doctor who'd had his license suspended twice for questionable practices. Of course Todd would choose someone with flexible ethics. "The house alone is worth at least $400,000, plus whatever she's got in savings. Jennifer thinks there might be some old bonds too, maybe life insurance. Look, Bob, this is going to happen one way or another. The question is whether you want in on the ground floor when we develop the property." Develop the property. Margaret's garden, Harold's workshop, the maple tree where they'd carved their initials. All of it was already planned for destruction. Todd's voice was getting closer. Margaret quickly turned off the recorder and moved to the other side of the garden, arriving just as he rounded the corner. "Oh, hello, Todd. I didn't hear you come over." "Hi, Margaret. Just thought I'd check on you." His smile was practiced, concerned. "How are you feeling today?" "A bit confused, actually. I could have sworn I planted petunias in this bed, but these look like marigolds." Todd's eyes sharpened with interest. "When did you plant them?" "I thought it was last week, but maybe it was longer ago." "Time seems to slip away from me lately. That must be frightening for you." "It is. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind." The concern in Todd's voice was utterly false, but Margaret played along. "Maybe you should talk to someone about these episodes." "You mean a doctor? A specialist? Someone who understands memory problems?" Margaret let herself look frightened and vulnerable. "Do you think I need that kind of help?" "I think it would be good to get a professional opinion. Jennifer and I have been worried about you." "I'm sure you have," Margaret thought, but she nodded gratefully. "Would you help me find someone?" "Of course. I'll make some calls." After Todd left, Margaret sat in her kitchen and played back the recording. His words were clear, damning, and completely incriminating. She had him admitting to planning her incompetency declaration, discussing her assets like they already belonged to him, and revealing his intention to develop her property. She made copy of the recording and hid them in 3 different locations. Then she called James Morrison. "I have him," she said simply. "What do you mean?" "I have Todd on tape, discussing his plans to have me declared incompetent by a corrupt doctor. He's already planning to develop my property." James was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, that's criminal fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse." "I know. We could have him arrested." "Not yet. I want to see how far they're willing to go." "Margaret." "James, I need to know the full scope of their plan. If we move now, we might not get Jennifer. She's my daughter. If there's any chance she's being manipulated by Todd, any chance she might come to her senses." Margaret's voice trailed off. Even as she spoke, she knew the truth. Jennifer was as guilty as Todd, perhaps more so, because she was betraying not just trust, but blood. "All right," James said finally. "But at the first sign that they're moving forward with the medical evaluation, we stop this. I won't let you risk your freedom for evidence." Agreed. The call came on Thursday morning. Margaret was having coffee with her friend Eleanor, a neighbor she'd known for 20 years, when the phone rang. "Mom, it's Jennifer. I've made an appointment for you to see a doctor tomorrow." "A doctor? But I just saw Dr. Peterson last month for my physical." "This is a different kind of doctor, a specialist who deals with memory issues." Margaret looked at Eleanor, who was listening with obvious concern. "Memory issues? Todd and I have been talking, and we think it would be good for you to get a professional evaluation, just to make sure everything's okay upstairs." The casual cruelty of the phrase, "upstairs," made Margaret's jaw clench. "I suppose, if you think it's necessary." "I do. Dr. Kellerman has an opening tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Todd will pick you up at 1:30. After Margaret hung up, Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. "Margaret, what's going on? You're sharp as a tack. Why would Jennifer want you to see a neurologist?" Margaret made a decision. Eleanor had been her friend for 20 years, had been there through Harold's death, had helped her through the darkest period of her life. If she couldn't trust Eleanor, she couldn't trust anyone. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something, and I need your help." For the next hour, Margaret explained everything. Lily's revelation, the recordings, the legal preparations, the charade she'd been performing. Eleanor listened with growing outrage. "That son of a bitch! And Jennifer? How could she do this to you?" "I don't know, but tomorrow they're taking me to a doctor who's going to declare me incompetent based on nothing more than Todd's lies. What can I do?" "Be a witness. James Morrison is going to be there. He's going to observe the entire consultation. If this Dr. Kellerman is as corrupt as I think he is, James will have grounds for criminal charges." "You want me to come too?" "If you would, as my friend, you have the right to accompany me to medical appointments. Your presence might make Dr. Kellerman more cautious about doing anything too obviously fraudulent." Eleanor's face hardened with resolve. "I'll be there. And Margaret, after tomorrow, we're going to destroy them." Dr. Kellerman's office was in a run-down medical building on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that specialized in disability evaluations and workers' compensation claims. The waiting rooms smelled of disinfectant and desperation, filled with people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret sat between Eleanor and Todd, playing the part of the confused elderly woman while inwardly cataloging every detail for her eventual testimony. James Morrison sat in the corner, ostensibly reading a magazine, but actually recording everything with a device in his briefcase. "Mrs. Whittemore?" A nurse called her name. "Dr. Kellerman will see you now." Dr. Kellerman was a thin, nervous man with thinning hair and the complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors. His handshake was limp and his eyes kept darting toward Todd rather than focusing on Margaret. "Mrs. Whittemore, I understand you've been having some cognitive difficulties." "Have I?" Margaret looked around the office vaguely. "I'm not sure what you mean. Memory problems, confusion, difficulty managing daily tasks?" Margaret noticed that he hadn't asked her about these symptoms. He was stating them as established facts. "I suppose I have been a bit forgetful lately. When did these symptoms begin?" Before Margaret could answer, Todd leaned forward. "We first noticed problems about 6 months ago. She was leaving burners on, forgetting appointments, getting confused about dates and times." Dr. Kellerman nodded and made notes without looking at Margaret. "And this has gotten worse recently?" "Much worse," Todd said. Last week, she asked me the same question several times in one conversation. She seems to have trouble following simple instructions. Margaret watched this performance with fascination and growing fury. Todd was answering questions meant for her, providing a detailed history of symptoms she'd never experienced, and Dr. Kellerman was accepting it all without verification. "Mrs. Whittemore, what year is it?" 2025. Margaret replied promptly. "Who's the president? Donald Trump? What's your address?" Margaret gave her address correctly, then added with apparent confusion, "Although sometimes I forget and give the old address from when Harold and I first got married." Dr. Kellerman made more notes. "Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" This was a standard cognitive test. Margaret began. 100, 93, 86, 79, then paused and looked confused. 72? No, wait, 73? I'm sorry, numbers have always been hard for me. In reality, Margaret could have continued the sequence flawlessly. She'd been balancing books and calculating figures for 50 years. But she wanted to see how far Dr. Kellerman would go with insufficient evidence. "Mrs. Whittemore, I'm going to show you 3 objects and ask you to remember them." He placed a pen, a rubber ball, and a small plastic elephant on his desk. "Can you tell me what these are?"
A pen, a ball, and a little elephant. Good. Now, can you tell me about your daily routine? Margaret launched into a deliberately confused and rambling account of her activities, mixing up days and times, claiming she sometimes forgot to eat meals, admitting to leaving doors unlocked. Todd nodded along, occasionally adding clarifying details that made her sound even more incompetent. After 20 minutes of this charade, Dr. Kellerman asked her to step out while he spoke with Todd privately. In the waiting room, Eleanor gripped Margaret's hand. "Are you all right?" Margaret nodded, though she felt nauseated by what she'd just witnessed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Todd's voice providing even more elaborate lies about her supposed decline. "Can't manage her medications anymore. Found her outside at 3 in the morning last week. Said she was looking for her cat, but she doesn't have a cat. Keeps talking about Harold like he's still alive." Each lie was crafted to build a picture of severe cognitive decline. Margaret realized Todd had been planning this for months, carefully constructing a narrative that would justify his actions. James Morrison caught her eye and nodded slightly. He was getting everything. 20 minutes later, Todd emerged looking satisfied. "Dr. Kellerman wants to see you again, Margaret." Back in the office, Dr. Kellerman barely looked at her. "Mrs. Whittemore, based on my evaluation and the information provided by your family, I believe you're experiencing significant cognitive decline that affects your ability to make sound decisions about your care and finances." Margaret felt the trap closing around her. What does that mean? "It means you need help managing your affairs. Your son-in-law has explained that your family is prepared to assist with this transition." "What kind of transition?" "Moving to a care facility where you'll be safe and properly supervised. Your family will handle the sale of your house and management of your finances." There it was, the entire conspiracy laid out in clinical terms. Dr. Kellerman was prepared to declare her incompetent based on a 20-minute interview and Todd's lies, clearing the way for them to seize control of her life and assets. "I see." Margaret looked confused and frightened. "When would this happen?" "Your son-in-law is going to start the legal process immediately. Don't worry, everything will be taken care of for you." As they left the office, Todd was practically glowing with satisfaction. "That went well, don't you think? Dr. Kellerman seems very thorough." "Very," Eleanor said dryly. In the car, Todd called Jennifer. "It's done. Kellerman will have the paperwork ready by Monday. We can file the petition next week." Margaret closed her eyes and let Todd's words wash over her. She had what she needed now, irrefutable evidence of their fraud. But hearing the eagerness in Todd's voice, the casual way he discussed destroying her life, still cut deep. Back at home, Eleanor helped Margaret to her kitchen and put the kettle on for tea.
That was the most disgusting thing I've ever witnessed. That man isn't a doctor, he's a criminal. Yes, he is. And now we can prove it. Margaret called James Morrison and arranged to meet him the next morning. Phase 2 of her plan was complete. Now came the final act.
That evening, as Margaret tucked Lily into bed, the little girl looked up at her with worried eyes. "Grandma, are you really sick? Daddy said you went to see a special doctor today." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Lily's hair. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sick, but some people want others to think I am." "Why? How do you explain greed and betrayal to an 8-year-old? How do you tell a child that her parents are willing to destroy her grandmother for money?" "Sometimes adults make bad choices," Margaret said carefully. "They want things that don't belong to them, and they forget about what's really important." "Like family?" "Yes, like family." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to stop them?" "Yes, I am. Tomorrow, actually." "Good." Lily's voice was fierce with the righteous anger of childhood. "They shouldn't be mean to you." Margaret kissed her granddaughter's forehead. "You're going to be a strong woman someday, Lily. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small or powerless." "I won't, Grandma, I promise." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She walked through her house, touching familiar objects, remembering the life she and Harold had built here. In his workshop, she found the small wooden box where he'd kept his important papers. Inside was a letter he'd written to her before his deployment to Vietnam, never sent because he'd decided to propose in person instead. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I found the courage to ask you to marry me, and you said yes. This house will be ours someday, and we'll fill it with love and laughter and children who know they're safe. Promise me that if anything ever threatens our home, you'll fight for it. Some things are worth everything." Margaret held the letter to her chest and made her own promise to Harold's memory. Tomorrow she would fight for everything. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the autumn leaves that carpeted Margaret's yard. She dressed carefully in her best navy blue dress and pearl earrings, the same outfit she'd worn to Harold's promotion ceremony 30 years ago. If she was going to war, she would dress for victory. James Morrison arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, followed by Eleanor and Dr. Sarah Chen. Margaret had asked Dr. Chen to be present as a witness to her competency, and the psychiatrist had agreed after learning about the fraudulent evaluation. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for weeks." At 10 o'clock, Margaret heard Todd's car in the driveway. She had called him the night before, asking him to come over because she was confused about some paperwork and needed help. He had agreed eagerly, no doubt anticipating another opportunity to document her supposed decline. "Good morning, Mom," Jennifer said, kissing Margaret's cheek. "You said you needed help with some papers?" "Yes, dear. I've been trying to understand some documents, but they're so confusing." Margaret led them into the living room, where James Morrison stood by the fireplace. Todd's expression immediately shifted from satisfaction to alarm. "Mom, who is this man?" "This is Mr. Morrison, my attorney. I asked him to help explain the papers." "Attorney?" Todd's voice cracked slightly. "Margaret, you don't need an attorney. We can help you with whatever you need." "Actually, Todd, I think I do need an attorney." Margaret's voice remained calm, but her posture straightened, especially after yesterday's interesting visit to Dr. Kellerman. Jennifer looked confused, but Todd's face went pale. "What do you mean?" James Morrison stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan, I think you should sit down." "We don't need to sit down," Todd said, backing toward the door. "Margaret, if you're having more confusion, maybe we should get you back to Dr. Kellerman." "Oh, I'm not confused at all. In fact, I'm seeing things very clearly for the first time in months." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Todd, do you remember our conversation on Tuesday? The one where you were talking on your phone in my garden?" Todd's voice went from pale to gray. "I don't know what you're talking about." Margaret pressed play. Todd's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "Dr. Kellerman said he can do an evaluation next week. He's flexible about these things." "No, she won't know what's happening until it's too late. The key is getting her declared incompetent before she tries to change her will or anything stupid like that. Jennifer sank into a chair, her face stricken. Todd, what is this? The recording continued. The house alone is worth at least $400,000, plus whatever she's got in savings. Look, Bob, this is going to happen one way or another. The question is whether you want in on the ground floor when we develop the property. Turn it off, Todd said, desperately. Margaret, you don't understand what you heard. I understand perfectly. Margaret's voice was steel. You've been planning to have me declared incompetent so you can steal my home and my life savings. You found a corrupt doctor to rubber stamp your lies, and you've been manipulating situations to make me appear confused. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan. I evaluated Mrs. Whitmore earlier this week. She shows no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. What you attempted yesterday was medical fraud. This is insane, Todd blustered. Margaret, you're obviously having some kind of paranoid episode. Am I? Margaret pulled out another device, a small video camera James had given her. This recorded your entire conversation with Dr. Kellerman yesterday. The part where you provided false medical history, the part where he agreed to declare me incompetent without proper evaluation, all of it. Jennifer found her voice. Mom, I don't understand. Are you saying you've been pretending? That you're not having memory problems? Margaret looked at her daughter. Really looked at her. Jennifer seemed genuinely shocked. Whether by the recording or by getting caught, Margaret couldn't tell. Jennifer, when you were 7 years old, you wanted a bicycle for Christmas. Your father and I couldn't afford the one you wanted, so we worked extra hours for 2 months to save up for it. Do you remember what you said when you saw it under the tree? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. I said it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen and that you and Daddy were magic. When you were 16, you came home crying because Brad broke up with you. We sat in this kitchen until 3 a.m. while you told me about your broken heart. Do you remember what I told you? You said that someday I'd meet someone who would love me so much that I'd understand why it didn't work out with Brad. When you married Todd, you said he was that person. You said he made you feel safe and loved. Margaret's voice broke slightly. I believed you. I welcomed him into our family. I trusted him with you. Jennifer was crying now. Mom, I never meant for this to happen. Todd said you were declining, that you needed help. I needed help, or you needed money. Todd grabbed Jennifer's arm. We're leaving. This is all crazy talk from a sick old woman. You're not going anywhere, James Morrison said calmly. He nodded toward the front window, where 2 police cars were pulling into the driveway. I called them this morning. They're here to arrest you for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Todd bolted for the back door, but it opened before he could reach it. 2 police officers entered, and within minutes, Todd was in handcuffs. You can't prove anything, he snarled at Margaret. I was trying to help you. One of the officers, a young woman with kind eyes, read Todd his rights, while her partner approached Jennifer. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us as well. Jennifer, Margaret said quietly, you have a choice to make. You can go with Todd and face the consequences of what you've done together, or you can start telling the truth about what really happened. Jennifer looked between her husband and her mother, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. Todd said you were getting sick and that it would be kinder to handle things before you got worse. He said you'd be happier in a place where people could take care of you. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting that we're in financial trouble, that Todd's been making bad investments, that we're going to lose our house if we don't find money somewhere. Margaret felt her heart break a little more. Her daughter hadn't just betrayed her. She'd been willing to destroy her mother's life to save her own comfortable lifestyle. Jennifer, did you know about Dr. Kellerman? Did you know Todd was planning to bribe him? No. I swear, Mom, I thought it was a real evaluation. When Todd said the doctor confirmed you were declining, I believed him.
James Morrison spoke quietly to the officers, showing them the recordings and video evidence. After a brief conference, they approached Jennifer again. "Mrs. Brennan, given your cooperation and the evidence suggesting you may have been manipulated by your husband, we're not arresting you at this time, but you will need to come to the station for questioning." As they led Todd away, he turned back to Margaret. "You think you've won, but you've just destroyed your own daughter's marriage. Jennifer will never forgive you for this." Margaret looked at Jennifer, who was standing in the middle of the living room looking lost and broken. "Jennifer, is he right? Will you never forgive me for protecting myself from your husband's fraud?" Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, I don't know if I can forgive myself. How did I get so lost that I was willing to let this happen to you?" For the first time that morning, Margaret's composure cracked. She went to her daughter and took her hands. "We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we do next." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and thorough. Dr. Kellerman lost his medical license and received a 2-year prison sentence for medical fraud. Todd was sentenced to 5 years for elder abuse and conspiracy charges. The judge called his actions a particularly heinous betrayal of family trust. Jennifer divorced Todd while he was awaiting trial, cooperating fully with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. She moved in with Margaret temporarily while she rebuilt her life, working as a substitute teacher and slowly repaying the debts Todd had hidden from her. On Thanksgiving Day, 6 months after the confrontation, Margaret sat at her dining room table with Jennifer, Lily, and Eleanor. The table was set with Margaret's good china, and the turkey was golden brown and perfect. "Grandma," Lily said, "can you tell the story again?" "Which story, sweetheart?" "The one about how you tricked the bad guys." Margaret looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved. Jennifer was still fragile, still rebuilding her sense of self after discovering how thoroughly Todd had manipulated her. But she was healing, and more importantly, she was present, really present, in a way she hadn't been for years. "Well," Margaret began, "it all started when a very brave little girl told her grandmother something important." As she told the story, Margaret thought about the new will she'd written, leaving everything to Lily with the trust she'd established. But she'd also created a fund for Jennifer, enough to help her start over without the burden of financial desperation that had made her vulnerable to Todd's schemes. The house was safe, the family was healing, and Margaret Whitmore, at 73, had learned that sometimes the best defense against betrayal is the willingness to fight for what matters most. Later that evening, after Jennifer had taken Lily home to their small apartment across town, Margaret sat in Harold's chair with a cup of tea and looked at his photograph. "We did it. We saved our home." Harold smiled back at her from behind the glass, young and proud in his Navy uniform, and Margaret could almost hear his voice saying what he'd told her on their wedding day. "Some things are worth everything, Maggie. Everything." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the garden where she'd hidden documents and the rose bush where Harold's memory bloomed eternal. Margaret pulled her shawl closer and watched the snow cover the ground like a blessing, like a promise that spring would come again, that love could survive betrayal, and that sometimes the strongest steel was forged in the fire of a grandmother's fierce protection. The house creaked and settled around her, full of memories and secrets and the quiet satisfaction of a battle well won. Margaret finished her tea, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Harold for 30 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to love and protect her family. But tonight, she was home, and home was safe.